Well, good morning, lords and ladies. Back to another morning with the Lord. It's the 7th of the 11th, 2021, Sunday, the Lord's Day, and I'm the local host, Lord Duffield. Now, I want to jump straight into it today. I was queuing up a few stories here, and I came across one. I'm going from the ABC today because I'm absolutely had enough already. What's this, episode 11, and I'm done with Channel 7. Channel 9's not too bad, but anyway, we're with the ABC today, and I've come across a story that I've never heard of before. The title of it here is US Secretary of State Antony Blinken orders probe into Havana Syndrome. Now, has anyone else out there heard of this Havana Syndrome? I started reading through this article, and what the actual fuck is this meant to be? This is some troubling stuff. Let's start it here. I've got key points here, but don't need to read them. We'll just start the article. The US State Department has named a new coordinator for its investigation into cases of so-called Havana Syndrome. Responding to increased pressure to investigate and respond to hundreds of brain injuries reported by diplomats and intelligence officers, Secretary of State Antony Blinken appointed a high-ranking deputy, Jonathan Moore, to coordinate the department's task force on the cases. Mr. Moore replaced Pamela Spratlin, a retired diplomat temporarily called back into service by Mr. Blinken before leaving in September. She had faced criticisms from some victims. People affected have reported headaches, dizziness, nausea, and other symptoms consistent with traumatic brain injuries. Causes under consideration include the usage of surveillance tool or a device intended to harm. Say that again. Causes under consideration include the usage of a surveillance tool or a device intended to do harm. And it's set up there. Who was it? They say diplomats and intelligence officers. The cases are known as Havana Syndrome because they date back to a series of reported brain injuries in 2016 at the US Embassy in Cuba. Mr. Blinken also appointed retired Ambassador Margaret Ayehara, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, it's spelled Uyehara, to lead efforts to directly support care for State Department employees. Investigators have been studying a growing number of reported cases by US personnel around the world and whether they are caused by exposure to microwaves or other forms of directed energy. Mr. Blinken said the government would do all we can to address the threat posed by anomalous health incidents. They've experienced serious physical consequences, including persistent headaches and hearing loss. They've also experienced psychological harm, including trauma, anxiety, depression. They've been affected, their careers have been affected, he said. This is an urgent priority for President Biden, for me, for our entire government, and we will do absolutely everything we can, leaving no stone unturned, to stop these occurrences as swiftly as possible. After years of investigation, the US government has still not publicly identified what or who might be behind the incidents, or whether they are, in fact, attacks. But leaders in the state and defense departments and the CIA have pushed employees to report possible brain injuries, and in some cases removed leaders who were seen as unsympathetic to their cases. But leaders in the state defense departments and at the CIA have pushed employees to report possible brain injuries, and in some cases removed leaders who were seen as unsympathetic to the cases. That's a weird line to end the article on, isn't it? But, I think that's meant to be a good thing, as if someone comes in that doesn't care about this, they're told to fuck off, and they get someone who does. But what the actual fuck? What sort of... Well, they said, microwaves or a device intended to do harm. That's crazy. Imagine that. It's sort of blowing me away. It's a really strange thing to hear. I've never heard of it. There's a video here. I don't know how long it goes for. It says ABC, the world, Havana Syndrome. Let's give it a listen.
As you said, it started in late 2016. It first hit American diplomats and American spies posing as diplomats in Havana, and basically some people heard a sound, some people didn't hear anything, but people started coming down with debilitating vertigo, nausea, sleeplessness, inability to concentrate. A lot of people couldn't work anymore. That it led to the embassy being basically shut down in Havana and derailing the kind of détente between America and Cuba. Then the same phenomenon popped up in China, in the consulate in Guangzhou, and then incidents in Shanghai. And now we know that these, what we think are now attacks from directed energy weapons that cause this damage to the brain have been happening in Georgia, Poland, London, Australia now, Taiwan, and now at home on U.S. soil.
So far more widespread than initially thought. Take us through again just what we understand when you're talking about a microwave-based attack. What sort of weapon is that?
So it's a directed energy weapon, as far as we understand. It directs electromagnetic radiation, apparently, at the brain, and it causes damage to from what we understand, damage to the white matter. That's the deeper part of the brain where all the kind of wiring networking is in the brain. And that's the part of the brain that doesn't regrow, doesn't replace itself. And so some of this damage is permanent.
So the belief from those that have been attacked or have suffered is that it is a foreign actor involved in this. And the fingers are being pointed at Russia. What have your investigations uncovered?
So I should also say, by the way, about the weapon, the U.S. also has this kind of weapon, but it's very large from what we've seen.
Yes.
From my reporting has found that it's gotten a lot smaller. It's portable. You can beam it through walls, through windows, and up to a couple miles away. From what I have found, CIA investigators have correlated the travel of agents from the FSB, the Russian security services, that places these agents in and around the space where people were attacked. These are CIA officers who were attacked around the same time including in Australia. In 2 instances where CIA officers were attacked, the FSB agents were actually in the same hotel at the same time that the attacks occurred. So this is not a slam dunk case just yet, but it is the beginning of an investigation that CIA investigators hoped the agency would pick up and run with, but it has been basically squashed, they believe, because the leadership is too scared to bring anything Russia related to our president.
Yes, I want to talk about that in a minute, but these attacks also happened in Russia, admittedly against US diplomats, US officials. Could that have been a deliberate ploy to distract attention from Russia as a perpetrator?
No, I think if anything, it points the finger at the Russians. That it happens on Russian soil. Russia controls what happens on its territory pretty carefully, and the fact that it was aimed at 2 CIA officers who were working at the time on a new effort to push back against Russian covert actions and active measures, really kind of seems like it would be the Russians, wouldn't it?
It is funny because Russia still seems to just have this real Cold War mentality without presuming that they are guilty in this instance. As you say, it's not a slam dunk, but they do seem to be the foreign actor that acts in this Cold War mentality.
Yes, and, as a lot of people that I spoke to about this who work on this issue, they don't understand why Russia is still doing this. They want us to, in some ways, they hate that they've become this third rail of American politics, but they kind of love that they're this boogeyman that everybody's talking about, that they're feared. They know they're not going to be loved by the Americans, but might as well be feared and respected, and have their opinion taken into account on the world stage. They, when they're in this Cold War mentality, what that means for them is that they're still a superpower, and that they're still treated like a superpower with the respect and awe that they think they deserve.
It's ironic, though, because as you pointed out, is Donald Trump has not been willing to take on the Russians. If they say they weren't involved, he just simply says they say they weren't involved. I believe them. So it is interesting that they've chosen to do it over this period of time when Trump has been in power and not really scrutinizing them.
That's right. Well, I think that there's also people, in the Russian security agencies who just do this. They're used to doing this. They've been doing this for decades. And until they meet resistance or some kind of pushback or somebody slapping them on the hand, they're going to keep going further and further and further. In 2019, as I found in my reporting, they were slipping date rape drugs in the drinks of CIA officers who were at receptions in American embassies. I mean, that's crazy.
It is completely crazy. Are the people, at least, who suffered, the diplomats, the CIA officials, have they been given compensation? Have they been treated seriously?
Not really. Unfortunately, our government is not really doing much for the people affected. This is the reason the main, character in my story, Mark Polymeropoulos, who was a very senior CIA official, the equivalent of a 4-star general. This is the reason he spoke out. He got basically doctors inside the CIA telling him he's crazy. This is what's happening to State Department officials, Commerce Department officials who have been affected. They're not getting the treatment or the support that they deserve while being hit on the job, doing their duties, representing the American government. And they're deeply frustrated.
Yes, well, in 2 weeks' time may change things, but I guess we'll have to wait and see the outcome of the US election. Julia, fascinating. We really appreciate it.
She got a funny accent for an Aussie. Outcome. Yeah. What the actual fuck? That's insane. I mean, wow. And that's like widespread. I can say it's the Russians, but how many soils did it happen on? Even here in Australia. And if this thing's fucking portable, imagine the damage you could do. If that thing's fucking portable, holy shit. Can shoot over miles? Fuck me. That's some legitimately worrying stuff. Okay, so, yeah, well, there you go. When was this story done? Because they're talking about Trump I guess this has been going on for since 2016. Where's the fucking date on this story? Posted 6 hours ago, so there you go. She's fairly recent. Good on you, ABC, at least you got some recent stuff up. Yeah, I have some other stories up here. Seeing as we're started off with the US, we should probably... I want to stick with some foreign news. Well, not foreign, but just back to the Australian and French relations. There's a story up here posted 1 hour ago. Diplomats uneasy as France-Australia diplomatic rupture shows no signs of repair. Some diplomats have a way with words, so when asked to describe what it's been like watching the Australian-France relationship unravel over the past 7 weeks, one foreign official working in Canberra summoned up an arresting image. It's like a slow-motion car accident, they said, on repeat. The ABC has spoken to several diplomats in Canberra about the controversy most requested anonymity so they could speak freely without offending either the Australian or French governments. As you'd expect, the extraordinary diplomatic dispute between Scott Morrison and the French President Emmanuel Macron has Canberra's diplomatic community abuzz. Unsurprisingly, officials are busy filing cables back to their home capitals on the axed submarine contract and the geopolitical implications of the dispute. But what has really transfixed most of them are the choices made by the two principals dealing with its radioactive fallout, and the way those choices are reshaping the relationship between their two countries. Some of these choices were made in the moment, when Mr. Macron was asked by reporters at the G20 in Rome if he thought Mr. Morrison had lied to him over the submarine deal. He paused for just a second before quite deliberately uttering 5 words which set off a fresh media storm in Australia and infuriated the federal government. "I don't think I know," Mr. Macron declared before walking off. We covered that fucking statement. It is impossible to know exactly what sort of calculus flashing through the president's mind in that moment, but it set off yet another round of diplomatic recriminations in both capitals. There was also, presumably, a moment when Mr. Morrison and his lieutenants, after weighing up how he should respond, decided they should also go nuclear. Within hours, they took the extraordinary step of breaking an ironclad diplomatic convention and leaking to Australian media outlets private messages from Mr. Macron, which they believed would fatally undermine his accusation that Mr. Morrison lied. The newspaper stories are predictable headlines emblazoned above "Liar, Liar, France on Fire," landed only 1 day before the French ambassador Jean-Pierre Thibel was due to front the National Press Club to lay out his vision for the future of the relationship. Ambassador's speech gets mixed reactions. the speech was always going to be mandatory viewing for the diplomatic corps, even before the dispute took its late twist in Rome. Some speculated Mr. Thibault would be keen to look forward rather than back, and sketch out how Australia could rebuild trust with France in the wake of what the French Foreign Minister famously labelled a stab in the back on submariners. But fury in Paris over the leaked text message curdled any prospects, however dim, of rapprochement. Phones buzzed relentlessly when Mr. Thibault was at the podium, and in the following hours, as foreign policy watchers in Canberra, Australian officials, diplomats and journalists traded notes and quips. Reviews of his speech were mixed. Some Australian government sources have implied that the French anger is partly performative, and that Mr. Macron's public displays of fury was made with one eye on the approaching presidential election in April next year. Deal was not a commercial contract, he said. When you agree to transfer the technology of your own core national defence capability, which are vital elements of our national defence force, you entrust your partner with vital elements of your own national security. That's a bloody good point, actually. Well, yeah, there's a lot more than just a busted deal here. This is some seriously strange occurrences. But then, makes me think about, like I brought this up in a previous podcast, but it was France who funded the construction of the Wuhan lab, and then China backed out with them, and then America came in. So it makes you wonder who's on whose team. What's actually going on? Because, Australia, where we come from English stock, I know that whole fucking Brexit bullshit caused a whole lot of fucking tensions there. So who knows what the actual fuck is really going on? And there's another story here with an analysis on Scott Morrison, and about how he has a trust problem and there's no easy solution. At a suburb in Dubai, on his way home, he looked drained. How old's this story? Morrison person, blah blah blah. Posted Friday the 5th of November. So a couple of days ago. It says, when Scott Morrison fronted the travelling media at a stopover in Dubai, on his way home he looked drained. He was a man in need of a steaming hot bath and a big political reset. He's presumably had the opportunity for the former. He and his advisors will be mulling over the latter for a long while yet. It's not an easy assignment, especially when it involves uses of integrity. The character question is important in politics. In recent political history, it was part of the downfall of then Labour leader Mark Latham, who had appeared a strong prospect in the lead up to the 2004 election. Morrison has long been regarded as a slippery political player. The imbroglio with the French, in which Emmanuel Macron branded him a liar, and he responded with a leaked Macron text, has further tarnished Morrison's personal reputation, even accepting Australians won't be inclined to side with France. Labor is banking on these events playing into the negatives about Morrison that are already in some voters' minds. Anthony Albanese said, "The only thing that the Prime Minister has accomplished on this trip is proving that he can't be trusted." Oh, and the only clips that they got of him speaking, he fucking makes irrelevant comments. Anyway, I'm going to leave Scott Morrison there. We all know he's... Well, what politician isn't sketchy? That's the problem, but that's how they trick you, because we all just eventually go, they're all fucked. Anyway, okay, I said we're getting off Scott Morrison, but I'm just noting here that Scott Morrison hails vaccine milestone as double dose vaccination rates hit 80% for Australians over 16. Happy days. So hopefully we can come out of the lockdown for a little while at least. We'll see how that's going to go. 80% of eligible Australians, blah blah blah, milestone set by federal government at the beginning of the inoculation, blah blah blah. Key points: Scott Morrison credited for massive national anthem. Fuck! Yeah, Scott Morrison... They would like to put the credit on him, because I bet you they're going to turn around one day and go, it was wrong. We should never have done it. Those people didn't get to see their families when we could have been like some other nation, blah blah blah. Vaccination rates among states and territories remain uneven. And the PM urged unvaccinated Australians to make a booking as soon as possible. So, yeah. That happened. Update posted 20 hours ago. As of 20 hours ago, the call went out that Australia has reached 80%. Now, I've got another story here. I know I haven't been going into coronavirus all that much, but there's a story here that says, for adults and children on the autism spectrum, getting a COVID-19 vaccine is easier said than done. And I thought this might be an important story to cover, because we don't normally think about those things, especially if they don't affect us. But this is a story that a lot of people are probably dealing with, and it's an important part of the picture. Let's have a read here. Peter Rostirola. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but it's spelled Rostirola. Received her COVID-19 vaccine at a mass vaccine site and thought the whole process was smooth and easy. But when her 13-year-old son Pablo became eligible for the vaccine, she knew it would be a different story altogether. Pablo is on the autism spectrum, and while experiences may vary, people on the spectrum may deal with sensory issues if they visit a new or crowded place. The whole process took over an hour, and there is no way my son would be able to cope with that, Miss Rostirola said. It would have been stressful for him. Miss Rostirola also works as an NDIS support coordinator and is aware of the needs of families who support someone on the autism spectrum. With the Delta variant outbreaks in some parts of Australia, she said that there had been rising concerns among the parents she works with about getting their children vaccinated. The biggest challenge, however, would be getting them vaccinated at max vaccination sites. Some of the kids required 2 support workers and a parent to come with them, she said. It can be challenging to sort out the logistics of bringing the child and their supports to these vaccine sites. Sydney mother Michelle managed to secure an appointment for her son Ollie, who is on the spectrum, at Kudo Bank area. However, Ollie also has severe anxiety and sensory issues when it comes to crowds, and he found it difficult to even leave the house on the day of the appointment. I had to call around for a GP and managed to book an appointment for him with them on another day, she said. Ollie was too anxious to leave the car, but they were kind enough to greet us at the car park and could get him vaccinated in the car. Clap, clap, very good. Marvellous. That's what you want from your healthcare. Although she managed to get his first dose out of the way, she was an added challenge to get him to leave the house to attend his second dose appointment. While the rest of them are vaccinated, Ollie's family are still concerned that they may bring the virus back to him. It's not as easy as forcing Ollie to get vaccinated because he understands why it's important for him to get the vaccine, Michelle told the ABC. He wants to get it, he just can't because of his anxiety. Miss Rostirola's son, Pablo, was eventually able to get vaccinated through a local Medicare practice thanks to his school, St Lucy's, in the Sydney suburb of Wahroonga, which caters to children with disabilities. We kept the school open as best as we could because the nature of our students meant that they needed structure and stability, and we wanted to support their parents, said David Raphael, the school's principal. In order to do that, we had to take extra precautions, including making sure that our students and staff had access to the vaccines. To help boost the vaccination rate among their staff and students, the school had reached out to a few medical clinics where they could direct staff and students to get their COVID-19 vaccine. So I find that surprising too. I know, we're obviously, the system's under much more strain because we're trying to push this shit out, but we used to get vaccinated at school all the time. Obviously they're pre-booked in and shit, but no. So there's another sort of side of the story you may not have heard. There's legitimate trouble getting this sort of thing done. Okay, there's another story here. I think this is the last story. Yep. Alright, this is the last story, and this is to do with our turtle population. There has been a huge spike in injured and unwell turtles in southeast Queensland, but it's hard to work out why. And it makes me wonder, I brought this up once again in an earlier podcast, if this has anything to do with the Fukushima meltdown. Because according to all reports then, you can't contain fucking radiation. And the currents just push that shit all through the Pacific. It is not healthily advisable to eat any fish out of the ocean anymore. Thanks for that, nuclear fucking proponents of the world. Done it again. Alright, let's have a quick look here. The key points. Many turtles brought into SeaWorld suffering from floating syndrome, which could be caused by multiple factors. A turtle rehabilitation coordinator said turtles were affected by a lot of the things that are caused by humans. Conservation officers said weather events and sediment were a key factor in poor turtle health. And a bit of a read here because that didn't really cover a great deal. What's floating syndrome? I don't know. Maybe it will be explained. There has been a massive spike in the amount of injured and unwell turtles. Veterinarians at SeaWorld on the Gold Coast have already seen a record 80 turtles come into their facility this year. Turtle Rehabilitation Coordinator Soiman Houlihan said that number was already a good 25 to 30 turtles higher than last year. The previous high for a year was in 2014 when 71 turtles were cared for at the centre. To the north, Australia Zoo have had 79 turtles come into their care from the Gold Coast, Redlands, Moreton Bay and Sunshine Coast regions. Easily the most in recent years. Many turtles brought into SeaWorld suffered from floating syndrome, which could be caused by multiple factors, including parasites and poor water quality. Ms. Houlihan said that despite the inherent information gap, turtles were affected by a lot of things that are caused by humans. Other ailments included boat strikes and fishing line entanglement. In the case of turtles found floating after boat strikes, Vet Claire Madden said it was impossible to tell which happened first. Are they sick to begin with, and then they are floating? Therefore, they are more likely to be hit because they are already floating, she said. They all float down here. Weather conditions are also likely to have played a role. Queensland's Parks and Wildlife Senior Conservation Officer Ian Bell said this sort of uptick really is closely linked to the El Nino Southern Oscillation Index, and it can have a positive or a negative effect. Dr. Bell said in strong El Nino conditions, there was less rainfall and more sunlight penetration of the seawater. Excellent conditions for seagrass growth. A year or so after a strong El Nino event, we see a very high nesting season because there's lots of nice fat old adult females that are ready to go and lay eggs, Dr. Bell said. On the other hand, if we have a strong La Nina incidence, we see a lot of rainfall, a lot of runoff, and the water's very turbid, and sunlight penetration is poor, so the seagrass doesn't go so well. Now, while the importance of the Great Barrier Reef as a breeding and nesting ground for turtles is widely known, the role of Moreton Bay as a foraging ground garners less attention. 6 of the 7 marine turtles species that live in Australian waters can be found in the seagrass-rich environment of the bay between breeding seasons in the waters of the Great Barrier Reef. Yeah, there's a fair bit of pollution in old Moreton Bay. Problems with turtles? Yes, this story is actually really fucking long. So, we might leave it there. The key points covered. Turtles be getting sick. And it could have a lot to do with pollution and so on and so forth. Well, lords and ladies, I think we've covered a fair amount of stories this morning. So, we shall leave it there. And, yeah, just harkening back to that first story we covered. What the actual fuck is this Havana Syndrome? That's some scary stuff. I love to know, like, she said these things are much more portable now. Like, they must have got one. I wonder if we can find some pictures of it. I'm gonna do some research today, because that is rather interesting. Alright, I've been Lord Duffield. You'll be listening to Morning with the Lord, and it is currently the 7th of the 11th, 2021. Until next time.